that healthcare is complicated is that our people are forced to pay by far the highest prices in the world for prescription drugs. So today, this morning, I want to thank Congressman Elijah Cummings, Congressman Lloyd Doggett for leading the effort in the House on this issue, Senators Cory Booker and Bob Casey for working with me on this Senate bill, and I'd also like to thank Senators Angus King and Martin Heinrich for being here this afternoon, and I suspect they will be here. Today, the American people pay by far the highest prices in the world for prescription drugs. Last year, nearly 1 out of 5 Americans between the ages of 19 and 64 who went to their doctors and got a prescription could not afford to fill that prescription. How crazy is that? What this means is that millions of our people are getting sicker because they don't have the medicine that they need. Some end up in emergency rooms at great cost, and others, frankly, lose their lives because they cannot afford the medicine that they need. Meanwhile, while Americans are dying because of the high cost of prescription drugs, the 5 largest drug companies in our country made over $50 billion in profits in 2015, while the top 10 pharmaceutical industry CEOs made $327 million in total compensation. In other words, drug companies make enormous profits. Their CEOs enjoy unbelievably high compensation packages, but the American people cannot afford the medicine they need. That has got to change. Today, drug prices are doubling, tripling, or quadrupling literally overnight. People walk into the drugstore, oh, says the druggist, price for your medicine has gone up by 2 times or 3 times. Why? Why is that happening? And the answer is it is happening because it can happen. Because the goal of the pharmaceutical industry is to make as much profit as they can and to hell with the needs of the American people. Every day, my office, and I am sure the offices of all of these members of Congress, receive letters and emails from their constituents. Let me just read one, which I think says it all. This is from a woman named Holly Ann from the state of Washington. She writes, and I quote, "I have a genetic condition called cystic fibrosis. In the past 4 years, I've been hospitalized 20 times for very painful and damaging complications related to my pancreas. I have to take many medications just to avoid being in the emergency room once a week. One of my medications is around $1,000 for a month's supply, which my parents cannot afford. Because of the cost, I don't take as much as I need to take, and my health is suffering because of it. Please help everyone else who is dying because they can't afford health care. I don't want to die at 18. End of quote. This is a letter from a citizen of the United States of America. Yet 50 miles away from my home in Vermont, many of the same medications manufactured by the same companies in the same factories are available for a fraction of the price. And we have a list of some of them right here. I don't have to go through them all. Bottom line is, same exact medicine made in the same exact factory by the same exact company sells in Canada and, in fact, all over the world at substantially lower prices than they are sold in the United States. And by the way, Canada does not have some of the lowest prices in the world. In fact, it has some of the highest prices. But compared to us, they look pretty good. And that is why I am very proud to join with Senators Booker, Casey, King, and Heinrich, and Congressman Cummings and Doggett, and a total now of 19 members of the United States Senate. We just introduced this bill the other day. We now have 19 co-sponsors to introduce this critical legislation, which will lower the cost of prescription drugs in this country. I won't go into all of the details, but the bottom line is what we have introduced with the help of these colleagues is legislation which makes certain that the medicine coming into this country is 100% safe, and it is going to be significantly lower cost than what we now have to pay. So with that, I want to again thank my colleagues for their working together on this issue. And let me bring up Congressman Elijah Cummings, who has been a real champion in the House in the fight for lower cost prescription drugs. Elijah?
I'm right here. Thank you. Thank you very much, Senator Sanders. And I want to thank you, Senator Sanders, for your leadership, and certainly to all my colleagues from the Senate and the House for being with us today. Ladies and gentlemen, we're here today because hardworking Americans are literally sick and tired of facing sticker shock every time they go to the drugstore with absolutely no end in sight. By the way, this is a bipartisan issue. A recent poll issued by the Kaiser Family Foundation shows that a majority of Americans, including Democrats, Republicans, and independents, believe that lowering prescription drug prices must be a top priority for this Congress. So that is exactly what we're trying to do here today. We're attacking this problem by focusing on ideas that even President Trump says he supports. Ideas like allowing for the responsible importation of safe and affordable drugs, and making sure that Medicare is finally allowed to negotiate for lower drug prices. The President's support for these ideas has been so clear that I'm tempted to introduce a bill in the House named the Donald Trump Drug Affordability Act. I'm sure he would like that. After he was elected president, President Trump said this: "I'm going to bring down drug prices." That's his quote, not mine. "I'm going to bring down drug prices." He also warned that the pharmaceutical industry is, quote, "getting away with murder," end of quote. When I met with him briefly during his inauguration, he said the same thing again. Words are nice, but people need relief. So you know what? He was absolutely right. The drug industry is getting away with murder. So if the president if he really means what he says, he will support our efforts and he will encourage his Republican colleagues to do the same. It is true that pharma has a lot of lobbyists and a lot of power. But we have something even more powerful. We have the support of the American people. They're calling on us to act, and we must heed their calls. As I listened to Senator Sanders, I could not help but think about the people in my district. One man said he felt so often like when he went to the drugstore, he had a gun, there was a gun to his head, and saying either pay up or die. Pay up or die. Ladies and gentlemen, we're better than that. This is the United States of America in 2017. We're better than that. And to ignore them would be legislative malpractice. American families have had enough. They deserve better, and an overwhelming majority of our nation agrees that the time for action is now here. And so I want to thank my colleagues again, and we are moving forward, and I'm looking forward to hearing, hopefully, what the President has to say tonight about this crucial issue that confronts almost every single American in our country. With that,
Thank you very much. Senator Casey?
sure.
Oh, yes, okay. Thanks very much. I want to thank my Senate colleagues who have worked on this with us together, Senator Sanders, of course, Senator Booker. I know Senator Heinrich is here with us today and working with us, as well as Senator King. If I missed someone, I'll amend that. And I'm grateful for the work of the House as well, Representative Cummings and Representative Doggett. Let me start with a statement that I think maybe goes without saying, but I think it encapsulates where we are. I've been across Pennsylvania for years, and I've heard about the concerns that seniors have, that middle-class families have, but never more so than in the last couple of months and weeks as people confront the challenge of just staying healthy every day. This affects families of all kinds all across a state like ours. And this effort, and this is not easy to do, to sit down and write complicated, difficult legislation, but we've been working on it for a good while now. I'm grateful to have a bill. I'm just going to walk through some of the mechanics of it, just so people are clear about some terminology. First and foremost, the bill requires foreign sellers to register with the FDA and agree to meet specific criteria, such as only purchasing drugs from FDA-inspected manufacturers or from other certified foreign sellers. Second, all patients seeking to purchase drugs for importation must provide a valid prescription to a licensed pharmacy in Canada, and we give the FDA clear authority to shut down bad actors. Fourth, access to prescription drugs for many families is not a subject that should keep them up at night. It's not a subject that should literally break the bank or break their bank when it comes to what happens to those families. I also think, as both Senator Sanders and Representative Cummings said, that there's bipartisan support for this kind of legislation, but it's critically important that we make sure that we do this as one people, that we come together on an urgent issue for the American people. They might be divided on a whole range of issues, but I think there's broad consensus to finally do something about an issue which Senator Sanders has been working on for a lot of years. He and I were elected the same year. We had a vote on this issue in 2007, so I've been voting on this issue all these years. But we've never reached the point we're at now, where we have a bill that has worked through a lot of difficult issues and has listened to a lot of good input before we have a bill introduced. And the number of senators on this bill to date is emblematic of that broad support. So I think the next speaker is Representative Doggett.
Thank you, Senator. And a salute to you, the Senator, to Representative Cummings, to each of our colleagues for their commitment on this important issue. In short, prescription price gouging has just gotten way out of control, and it is threatening the health and the financial security of millions of Americans. This outrageous overpricing is not limited to one pharmaceutical company or one class or type of drugs. It is pervasive throughout the industry. All of us want this industry to earn sufficient profits to be able to innovate and to cure dread diseases before any of us get them. I think that's the feeling of everyone. But it does not take the kind of outrageous price gouging that has been occurring to provide sufficient funds for innovation. All this bill is about is a modest step to restore competition in a free enterprise system, to let competing forces work to try to bring down the prices on some of these drugs. And whether it is EpiPen or insulin, whether it is cancer or hepatitis C, families and taxpayers are bearing right now the impact of what are government-approved monopoly prices. And that's why we have the problem we have today. Now, President Trump promised to bring down drug prices, to use his words, big league. And although he's declared that the pharmaceutical industry, as Representative Cummings said, is getting away with murder and has properly described astronomical drug cost, and said that for Medicare and for Medicaid we have to get the prices down, way down, his first meeting, closed-door meeting, one of the very first at the White House, was with the representatives of Big Pharma. And he came out of that meeting, from my perspective, getting this problem exactly backwards, because he talked about the prices being too high in other parts of the world, too low in other parts of the world. The problem is not that they're too low in Canada or in Finland. The problem is they're too high in America, and that you can go right across the border and get drugs for a fraction of the cost that they cost us here in America. So in short, we're just saying, Mr. President, we're calling you out. Stand by your campaign promise. Act now against price gouging by calling upon your Republican allies here in the Senate and in the House to hold immediate hearings on this bill, which won't solve all the problem, but it will be a significant step forward for many consumers to be able to get prescription drugs from right across the border. And when that begins to happen, some of these monopolies will begin to lower their prices too, and we will begin to resolve this critical issue. Thank you.
Senator Booker?
So we have a crisis in our country with the cost of prescription drugs. And since the time I was mayor of Newark, New Jersey, some of the more painful conversations that I've had to sit with folks who have to make this difficult decision, whether to forego prescribed drugs or to try to find some way to pay them, but then fall behind in rental payments or mortgage payments or car payments. This kind of stress, this kind of, in my opinion, inhumane reality in our country where people are making their decisions, their families' decisions, is unacceptable in a nation this great. We have to bring down the prices of prescription drugs in our country. And I am very grateful in the work that has been happening over the last weeks between my team, Senator Casey's team, Senator Sanders' team, in putting together a bill that is focusing on one of the critical elements of an overall strategy, of a larger strategy to bring down prescription drugs. This is a strong bill. And the safety provisions that I brought to the table, that Senator Sanders, Senator Casey worked on and brought to the table, these are critical elements in making prescription drug importations work and work well. This bill will make sure that not only individuals in our country, but also wholesalers and pharmacies can have access to Canadian drugs that are cheaper, as well as potentially other OECD countries that meet the standards that we have set in this legislation. Let me be clear. We have a lot of work to do to address this crisis. This bill is an important part, but there's a lot more work that we have to do together to address this growing crisis. I want to finally say about our president, who has said a lot of talk about health care and has recently confessed how complicated, quote unquote, he thinks it is. He has made promises to the American people about prescription drug prices. He has made promises to the American people. And now it's time for him to put up or shut up. This bill is one of the things that is going to provide that can provide Americans cheaper access to drugs. It is time for him to join with us, or in my opinion, to confess his lies to the American people. Thank you.
Amen. Thank you. Senator King.
You see the entire independent senators caucus right up here on the stage. As everybody's observed, this really is a crisis. It's a crisis that people confront each day when they walk into the drugstore. It's a crisis when they get their bills. It's a crisis for Medicare because of the cost that we're paying for drugs, which is probably 20 to 30% higher than it ought to be. And what I like about this bill, and I think it should appeal to our colleagues on the Republican side, is this is a market-based solution. This isn't regulation. This is deregulation. This is a market-based solution that simply opens up to competition across the border, or the borders of our country, what is now a closed market with a government-sponsored monopoly. That's what a patent is. It's a government-sanctioned monopoly. And when you have a monopoly, there are only two ways to deal with it. It's either through a market mechanism or a regulatory mechanism. Nobody wants to go the regulatory route. It's cumbersome, slow, and indeed, I think, could impede innovation. But to make it a market so that people can get their drugs from different parts of the world, and in this case from Canada, to me just makes common sense. Now, I'm in a state that borders Canada. In fact, my principal foreign policy credentials are that I can see Canada from Maine. But we know in Maine about going across the border and being able to buy prescription drugs and the difference in prices. My problem is that I feel like the only guy on the plane paying full fare. People are getting discounts for this and discounts for that, and yet our citizens and our seniors are paying full fare. So that's number one, and I think the second part of this that is, again, a free market solution is to have Medicare be able to negotiate volume discounts for drugs. It's the only system in the world where you buy something by the millions and you don't get any discount. Why not? Because the law that was passed back in the early part of this decade was that the Medicare can't negotiate. Congress forbade that. If we just got the discounts that Medicaid and the VA already get in the Medicare program, it would save the taxpayers and the Medicare recipients in the tens of billions of dollars a year. So This is a market-based solution to a very real and direct problem, and I think this is a real opportunity, and I want to thank the sponsors for the work that they've done in putting together a comprehensive package that answers all the questions about safety and reliability and how you can determine whether this is these are safe drugs that will be effective. But the bottom line is, or the conclusion is, this is a direct, visible way that we can bring relief to the people of Maine and Minnesota and Vermont and all across the country in one of the most serious problems that we're facing today. Otherwise, people are going to demand more radical solutions, and I think this is one that we ought to take immediately. It's not the entire answer, but it's an important one, and I'm delighted to be able to join in the sponsorship of this legislation.
Thank you very much. Senator Heinrich.
I'm not going to say a whole lot because you've heard the same story that we all feel and hear from our constituents over and over again. The good news is the United States has the safest pharmaceutical supply in the world. The bad news is we pay more than any other country for that pharmaceutical supply. And our constituents should not have to choose between safety and being able to access the critical life-saving pharmaceutical drugs that they need to maintain their health care. And that's what this legislation is about. Details matter, and I think this legislation gets the details right. I think it preserves the sort of system that has given us the safest pharmaceutical supply in the world, while at the same time using a free market, market-based approach to driving down those costs. Senator King mentioned the fact that Medicare can't negotiate for those drug prices. My parents both are well into their retirement. They both have pharmaceutical needs. My dad gets his through the VA, and he can get a better deal than my mom can because they can negotiate for those prices. So we need to find pragmatic, realistic ways to drive down pharmaceutical costs with free market mechanisms. That's what this legislation does. And I want to commend all of the House and Senate members here who came together in a spirit of putting something together that will actually work. I am more optimistic than I have ever been that we're going to get something done on this. And I want to thank Senator Sanders and Senator Booker, who we've been talking to for, I guess, a month now about this legislation, and all of my colleagues from the House and Senate who've made this possible. This is far overdue. Our constituents are clamoring for change here, and we need to deliver on this. Thank you.
Thanks. Okay. Any questions, sir? You are from where?
Jonathan Salant from the Star Ledger. Senator Booker, you voted against the Sanders close up prescription drug amendment earlier. What's changed now that you've gone onto this bill?
First of all, I'm a little upset that you didn't say the Newark Star Ledger. You got to claim where you're from. First of all, I'm proud of this bill. And I think the fact that you see the large coalition that's involved with this, and we already have 19 Senate colleagues on board, is really a testimony that we have got a strong bill that satisfies many concerns of many of our colleagues. I have always believed in prescription drug imports. I've always believed that that has to be only one of many of the tools in the toolbox, some of which have already been mentioned here, like Medicare Part D negotiations. We have a lot of work to do on this issue, and I'm very proud of the bill that we have, especially because of the safety mechanisms that have been put in place, that I'm grateful to Senator Sanders and his team, as well as Senator Casey, that we worked long and hard on. And we putting forth a bill that's going to ensure that the drugs that the American public get access to, whether they come from Canada, and frankly, I believe in prescription drug imports from other countries as well, as long as they meet the safety standards that American citizens should rely on. This bill satisfies that. I'm proud to have co-authored the bill. I'm proud to be sponsoring it, and I actually think it's going to accomplish, should it pass, and I hope to say when it passes, it will satisfy, I think, what many Americans have been clamoring for, which is better access to low-cost drugs.
Thank you, Greg. Sir?
I
You are from,
I'm with the Washington Examiner. I have a quick question about those safety procedures and specifically about websites. A big question that a lot of people have had about is how do you ensure that websites that offer drugs are actually, from Canada or actually, you say that they have to register with the FDA. How exactly are you going to?
well, I'm not going to go into every detail of a complicated bill, but I think as you heard from Senator Booker and from everybody else, there is no argument. The drugs that come into this country must be 100% safe, and we will do that. We will not tolerate rogue outfits. The Canadians themselves have very, very strong safety standards equivalent to our own, and that is what we are going to make happen. I would just make this point. Right now, when you go out and leave here and you go to lunch and you have a nice salad, the likelihood is that many of your vegetables will come from Mexico, will come from countries around the world. If you're having fish, the fish might come from Asia. If the United States can have a regulatory system where we feel confident that the vegetables, the poultry, that the fish coming from all over the world is safe, does anybody have any doubt that we can make certain that major brand name prescription drugs, the largest pharmaceutical companies in the world, coming from a country like Canada, which has extremely high standards, will be safe entering the United States? And the answer is no. There should be no doubt. Let me also say this. All of us understand, and I hope you understand, that when you take on the pharmaceutical industry, we are taking on perhaps the most powerful lobbying force in the United States of America. These are people who never lose. These are people today who have 1,400 well-paid lobbyists right here in the nation's capital, including many former members, Democrats and Republicans from Congress. They have spent hundreds of millions of dollars in campaign contributions. Do we expect that the pharmaceutical industry will spend an enormous sum of money to oppose us? Of course we do. But as you've heard from all of the members here, this is the time. The American people are sick and tired of getting ripped off, and we're going to win this thing. Nicole?
The pharmaceutical industry is opposed to this, obviously.
Are they? I am shocked.
You received a letter today, I don't know if you've had a chance to see it, from Pew Charitable Trust, and it raised public health concerns, safety concerns. I'm wondering if you want to address that.
I haven't. I've heard that. I haven't read the letter. Look, we are going to hear a lot of concerns from a lot of people. And this goes on every single time. Anybody with any idea tries to do something about lowering the outrageously high prices of prescription drugs in this country. I worked in California trying to pass what was called Proposition 61, but I won't go into all of the details. Pharmaceutical industry spent $131 million in one state trying to beat back an effort to lower the cost of medicine. So we're going to see opposition, no question about it. But I think, as you've heard from everybody up here, what we have done is worked overtime to make sure that this legislation makes 100% certain that the products coming into this country are 100% safe. Sir.
Michael Coleman with the Allen Coastal Journal. Senator Hendricks, question for you. Together with Senator Booker against the earlier version of this bill. What changed here to get your support? And if it's safe, can you give me a specific? It wasn't a bill about what.
So the previous amendment was not a bill. This is the bill. And we have the safest pharmaceutical supply in the world because of what the FDA can do through their regulatory process and their track and trace authorities. This legislation includes that so that anything being made or purchased here is on a level playing field with what would be made and imported into the United States. And so it satisfies those concerns.
Thank you. Other questions?
I just want to say one thing, Bernie, if you don't mind. You know, I'm standing here, I'm listening to these questions. You may be missing the point. This is the greatest country in the world. I think you said it quite well, Bernie. If we can't guarantee the safety of drugs, something's wrong with that picture. But the problem is that we got to balance, we got to look what's on the other side. You got people getting sicker and sicker. You got people dying in the United States of America. So we can raise these issues over and over again. All of these folks have done everything in their power. We've got the best minds in America up on this hill. They put together a great bill. Now we've got to forge ahead. And I'm hoping that President Trump will join us, because this is about, when we talk about Americans keeping money from their paychecks so that they can move from the lower economic class to the middle class and stay in the middle class, these are the kinds of things that matter. But the great thing, the main thing is when you're talking about somebody's health and whether or not they can get the chemo that they need to address something like breast cancer or prostate cancer or whatever, that's the key. And that's where we've got to say, as Americans, we need to take care of each other. And we're going to do everything in our power to fight. So you're going to raise these questions forever and ever. The pharmaceutical industry is going to do that. That's what they do. That's their job. And at some point, we've got to say, Americans come first.
Good. Yes, ma'am. No, that's one right here. Yes. Of the 19 who are on, those are all Democrats, and Senator King and myself. But we have, the truth is, there has been, as I think you've heard this morning, a history of Republican support for this market mechanism. And in fact, if my memory is correct, we had 12 Republicans supporting our amendment. So we look forward to working with Senator McCain, who has long been involved in this issue, and others to win support. And I think, as you've heard from Congressman Cummings and others, President Trump over and over again made the point, correctly, that the cost of prescription drugs in this country is too high. I think he said the pharmaceutical industry is getting away with murder. Was that his quote?
Right.
Well, now is the time for him to step up to the plate. Rhetoric is great. We've got real concrete legislation that will substantially lower the cost of prescription drugs in this country. We invite the president to come aboard. Let me get, yes, ma'am.
Yes, Representative Cummings, reportedly the president said he wanted to meet with you directly to talk about this issue. Is
Yeah.
there something that is on the books?
Yeah, we'll be meeting. We'll be meeting it sometime next week. We had a little bit of a conflict because I've got to be at a town hall meeting on the Affordable Care Act. Amen. And so, but we're working it out for next week sometime. I'm looking forward to it.
Okay. Well, listen, thank you all very, very much. Take care. Thank you, Bertie.